Welcome to EDTE 255, Introduction to Democratic Perspectives in K-12 Education. This is Module 4, A History of School in America, your reading recap. This chapter provides an overview of the origins of public education in the United States, looking at a variety of reasons in which schools started to develop in local communities. There are various reasons and beliefs for new schools and various approaches to education, as you read. The origins of public education have roots in homeschooling in churches, which eventually migrated to organized situations in churches or in homes, such as dame schools. Then we also saw more advanced schooling with Latin grammar schools, where students were introduced to the historical teachings of Greek and Roman scholars. We also saw the advent of the academy, and more commonly now we've seen common schools which have evolved into public schools, and then also the parochial school, common school breakdown. Parochial schools is just a term that's used to identify schools that are usually run by a Catholic church, but it can be other religious institutions as well. We also have seen that many of these approaches to developing schools reflect different values and beliefs for education, such as having democracy and an informed public, transmitting values and morals and religious beliefs, also having some type of geographic center, usually in a city or a town or a village, and then having people who are skilled enough to work in a factory model. And this is where we see the advent of a factory model in education, where we put in a lot of students, try to inform them of information and provide them skills, and then there's the output of graduation. We continue to see new approaches to education in schools in the United States. Specifically, we start to see the charter movement in the past couple decades, and with the advent of the internet and high-speed internet, we see online schools and opportunities to improve access to students to educational opportunities, including this course. Along with the advent of public education in the United States came the need for higher quality teachers. As you read in the book, often the requisite to become a teacher was just having attended school yourself. And this is part of the advent of the idea that anybody can teach, or that if you can't do something, you should become a teacher because you've experienced school. Throughout this course and throughout your program as in the teacher education preparation program, we hope that you see that that isn't a valued idea in the field of education. Oftentimes we use other analogies to demonstrate this. For example, almost everybody's been to a doctor. Does that mean they're qualified to be a doctor? It might seem facetious or funny to think that, but that's how some people view education. Another one is many people have flown on a plane. Does that make them qualified to fly a plane? As people start to realize, and as you start to learn about the ins and outs of the field of education, you'll have to become a voice for teachers and for teacher education to say it does take skill and preparation to be a teacher. Teacher education began with something called normal schools. Usually they were just a few years in length and then eventually became full undergraduate type degrees and similar programs like you have now. What you may not have known is that Chico State started as a normal school in Northern California. Its primary purpose at its origin was to prepare teachers to teach. You can visit the web links posted online or in the slide here, and also do a search on Chico State's website for normal school, and you'll find some cool tidbits of history. There's also a link posted in this module after this reading recap. In this chapter, you also learned about broad philosophies of education. There are several philosophies that exist, including essentialism, perennialism, progressivism, critical theory or social reconstruction, and even existentialism. There are other minor or smaller philosophies of education that sometimes are quote-unquote housed under other terms, such as aesthetic education, learning how to value aesthetics in life, the idea of unschooling, where one way to learn is to not actually have a formal school setting, and then also democratic education, which is the process of promoting a democratic society where everybody's voice can be heard. One thing that your book does not specifically talk about is the difference between education and schools, and that's important to realize. As a future teacher, you will be working in a school, but that does not necessarily mean that your view of what schools are for matches your belief of what education is. Often they are closely aligned. When it comes to actual schools and how they're funded by the public, there are 4 major purposes for schools. One is economic, to help promote a job force that is capable of perpetuating a strong economic situation. Another purpose of formal schools is intellectual, to prepare people and students with knowledge and skills. Another purpose of schools is broadly defined as social, as helping students develop communication skills, interpersonal skills, and helping them engage in a society and continue to promote a positive social community. And then the last one, people see schools as a way for civic engagement to promote, for example, democratic principles. You can see how some of these purposes of schools do align closely with some philosophies of education. The distinction here is that one does not have to go to school to get an education. And this actually reflects the idea of unschooling. Some people do not necessarily see schools as the only or the best way to educate a public. The last major focus of the chapter was looking at education reform. In the past 4 decades, there have been major pushes that have changed how education is approached in the United States and how it affects you as a teacher and as a student. On the screen and in your book, you saw some of the major legislation and court cases that have affected how we now teach in education. Specifically, the idea of the war on poverty to make sure that all students have access to a good education. We saw the court case of Brown versus Board of Education that helps address issues of racial inequality in education to make sure that all students, regardless of their race, have equal access. We also saw Title IX, which addressed issues of gender inequality, and then also laws regarding special education, such as IDEA. We also see that there are options to make sure that educational opportunities are available for people whose language is not, her first language is not English, such as Title VII with bilingual education. And then we also know that there are laws regarding immigrant status. For example, there has been a court case that decided that even non-citizens are entitled to a free public education in the United States, and that was the court case of Plyer versus Doe. We also saw some education reform that affect our accountability and our standards. It wasn't until 30, 40 years ago that the idea of having common standards within even a state or across a nation really began to appear. One thing to know is that the federal government does not create standards. Again, the federal government does not create standards. This is an issue that is up to the states because of the Bill of Rights under number 10, where anything that's not listed in the Constitution is the right of the state to decide. So individual states have the right to decide what the standards and expectations are going to be as students. So when you hear people or public talk about the federal government making standards, it's actually inaccurate. The federal government does make some laws about making sure that everybody has access to education, but they don't actually choose the standards. One illustration of this that you might have heard of is Common Core. Common Core is a set of standards designed for math and reading, and it is adopted by many states, but it is not adopted by all states, and it was not developed by the federal government. It was actually developed by a consortium or a group of states to have a common set of standards. So again, the federal government doesn't actually make standards for students. That said, it does have some laws to ensure that students are learning and that there's some accountability for what the work that teachers in schools do. And this has come from several different studies, reports, policy, and court cases, such as A Nation at Risk, which examined the success rate of students in the early 80s, late 70s. We also saw the law of No Child Left Behind in the early 2000s, and then more recently, Every Student Succeeds and the Race to the Top. If you have any questions about the content of A History of Schooling in America, this reading recap, or the extra tidbits that I placed into this presentation, please email me. Again, make sure to take the quiz based on the chapter, and make sure to post your initial response and replies to the discussion board.